Good morning. Today we have with us a veteran from the cybersecurity practice who has been the face of the industry for decades now. We have with us Vishal Salvi, CISO and head cybersecurity practice Infosys. Vishal definitely needs no formal introduction. So Vishal, it's a pleasure to have you today interact with the DataQuest platform and having this virtual interaction with you. And what better day than 30th November, the Computer Security Day, to interact with you, So it's a great start. And without much ado, welcome, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Minu, for having me here today.
Yes, so I will just begin with, I'm sure you hear these questions a lot of times. So having spent decades in the BFSI sector, as a CISO, and now responsible for the cybersecurity practice business delivery, so how do you think the importance of security has traversed over the last few years?
Yeah, so I think when we started the information security space, and we used to obviously call it information security then,
Mhm.
and it was just the beginning, right, of trying to really understand what does access control mean, and we were it was just the initial stages, right? And I've kind of seen in the last 2 decades how the importance of this topic has grown, primarily because of the way technology has changed and how digital has become a reality of our lives. And you can't imagine any particular activity or a task being completed without technology involvement, right? And with that, obviously, comes the societal problem of the adversaries, who try to exploit um, the current infrastructure or the systems that we have for their own nefarious, needs, in terms of trying to steal data or, transfer money in an unauthorized manner, and so on and so forth. And so we have also seen the rise of the threat actors and their motivations, different motivations towards that. And so it's obviously become a very mainstream topic right now. It's a clearly a well-defined risk statement for today's individuals as well as corporations and states. And so it has become truly mainstream, in terms of making sure that you have a good strategy to address the cybersecurity risk for you as individuals or you as organizations.
So as you rightly mentioned, the strategy part. So the pandemic really accelerated the digital transformation, the drive, and it really did not, if I would say, did not allow the users the luxury, to strategize, plan because of paucity of time. The turnaround time expected was very little. So do you think there's a need to rethink the design? Is there a need for revisiting the security architecture? Because, it underwent a change with cloud adaptation, hybrid work environment, increased security at the edge, SaaS, and then of course we hear about the zero trust, the ZTNA solutions. So what's your thought on that?
Minu, sometimes I wonder, if something like a pandemic would have hit us maybe 20 years or 25 years back, we
Hmm.
would have been in such a bad situation, because we
Absolutely.
were, from a technology point of view and even from a security point of view,
Hmm.
we would have not been just ready, right? Now, if you look at in terms of the time when pandemic hit us, the cybersecurity world or the architecture was anyway going through a massive change, in terms of being able to allow a borderless kind of architecture, right? And the perimeter, as we knew, it was anyway sort of diminishing, and we were always talking about extended enterprises, diminished perimeters and dispersed users and other things, right? What pandemic of course did is that it accelerated that process in a way that you would have never imagined, right? And but because the technology existed, the only thing that was required to be done for the technology industry as well as the security industry was to really pivot to this massive scale that was required, right? Where
Hmm.
anything between 5 to 20% of the operations were happening remotely, we had to pivot to almost 100% happening remotely, right? And I think that while it took some time, but because we were ready, we could do it in much faster manner. And so eventually within the matter of first 3 to 6 months, I think we were almost in a stability mode, right? As far as that massive change was concerned. So I think that is one important aspect, right? That I think we should acknowledge. And I've said this in past, and I want to say it again, that the work that the technology world has done for the globe and the cybersecurity world has done during this period of time is just extraordinary, in terms of, and I think a lot of times we don't really acknowledge their contribution to for us to do this pivot and allow business as usual without any impact whatsoever, right? So I think is we need to acknowledge that, and we need to applaud the contribution of this segment of people to ensure that the world continued to function while we were going through such an extraordinary period of time in pandemic, right?
True.
Now, coming back to your question on technology, so I think if you look at it in terms of the adoption of cloud and the rise of the endpoint, and what I mean by that is the two important changes which have happened in the security world. One is in terms of being able to orchestrate the controls, whether you talk about access, whether we talk about encryption, whether we talk about data loss prevention, whether we talk about second factor authentication, and various other things. So we are able to now put all of that on the endpoint, right? So in a way, we have democratized and distributed the way we build a cybersecurity architecture. And the second thing which we have been able to do is to migrate all the brain and all the decision making to the cloud, right? And these two broad changes, architectural changes, have actually helped security architecture to pivot to a completely new paradigm of how we manage security. In the good old days, it was all deeply central, deeply data center centric, and deeply like a command and control kind of a way, right? And that's no longer scalable. And so therefore, these two changes are really fundamentally changing the way we manage security architecture for today and tomorrow.
We are seeing this landscape change, So, how do you think the importance of cybersecurity, in today's hybrid landscape is achieving business resiliency, vis-a-vis maybe pre-pandemic kind of a thing or little earlier than that, How do we see that happening?
See, cyber resiliency is a very important topic, and it has to be now part of the organization's crisis management plan, right? We have already seen how profoundly the pandemic has underscored the importance of crisis management in any given organization, and we had seen that the need for collaboration between the business teams, the delivery teams, the sales teams, the legal teams, the HR teams, the finance teams, the IT teams, the security teams, the privacy teams, all of them had to come together to collaborate and work together to actually deal with a situation like a pandemic, right? And in my mind, a cybersecurity crisis is of similar nature. If God forbid, if a cyber crisis hits any organization, you would have to orchestrate the same level of collaboration and coordination across all these functions. So I think it's very important that every organization realizes that, and so therefore plans for it in terms of how do we put it together. Now, if you look at in terms of what's happening around the world, clearly there is definitely a lot of focus on cyber resiliency, and cyber resiliency has two connotations. One is the organization context, which I just talked about, but there is also this nation state and nation cooperation context, where in terms of what is the public policy that we want to set up, how do we how do we have international cooperation and collaboration and so on and so forth. But if you keep that aside and just specifically talk about only organizations, then what we are seeing is that yes, there is a focus and there is a widespread understanding and implementation which is happening in cybersecurity controls, which obviously helps you to build your own cybersecurity resilience. But at the same time, we are also seeing many examples of organizations crumbling down to cyber attacks. Okay,
Absolutely.
and I think is a very important trend, and we are seeing those industries which were not that heavily regulated or were never worried about cybersecurity risk are the ones which are getting more impacted because of the fact that their underlying infrastructure was not resilient enough to counter the today's modern cybersecurity risks and threats. And so I think one of the things that is happening right now is a rapid and massive upgrades that are actually required, and also something which is getting done for these industries and these organizations. So we will actually see this happening, and as you know, the problem with the risk and the cybersecurity risk is it's a cat and mouse game, right? And
Absolutely.
so you will always see this being played out, and so we will you know the we will continue to see many examples of uh, extraordinary attacks and extraordinary breaches. But at the same time, there are many organizations who are well protected and therefore cyber resilient.
Yes, so you rightly mentioned, so talking about the threat vectors, so Apache Log4j last year, with the CVSS 10 score, really took the sleepless nights for a lot of the IT fraternity, So we see a lot of newer technologies also being integrated. You rightly spoke about moving the security, and preparing for these attacks. But with these newer technologies like 5G, metaverse, so they come with their own security challenges. We see innovation happening, capabilities being offered, so there's this new opportunity we are opening up also for the threat vectors, and the actors. So, what according to you would be the security and privacy strategies that should be designed for these fresher challenges?
I think the one of the most important element of cybersecurity risk management is that we need to democratize it to everyone, right? And and I think what has happened is because we have created this unit called cybersecurity unit. Generally, the rest of the organization thinks that it's miraculously this cybersecurity unit will be able to help them save them from any cybersecurity threats. But in reality, that is not the case. Every single member and stakeholder in the system needs to play their part to ensure that they are able to get their organization cyber resilient, right? So in my mind, there is a significant need to spread this awareness and understanding across all stakeholders. Unfortunately, right now, we still have this mindset that this is not going to happen to me, or somebody else is going to solve this for me. And
True.
that is unfortunately not true at all, right? The sooner the whole stakeholder and ecosystem realizes this, the much easier it is for us to solve this problem, right? So majority of the issues are stemming from the fact that people are either not aware or do not take accountability and ownership of their role in cybersecurity. And therefore, the notion of secure by design, we keep on talking about it, but it's not. It's very hard problem to solve, right? So I think if you take examples of Log4j, you take examples of the extraordinary amplification and acceleration of technology adoption with metaverse, 5G, and so many other things. What is happening is the attack surface is only going to grow. And in a way, I always say this, right? You have to mind the gap. Mind the gap between the technology innovation and the catch up that the cybersecurity industry is actually has to do to be able to bridge the gap. Unfortunately, the rate of innovation is far, far faster and rapid as compared to the way in which security industry is innovating. And so the gap is constantly growing, and hence the attack surface is constantly growing. And so therefore we then start grappling with challenges like a Log4j, where we had so much of widespread deployment of Log4j that when a vulnerability like was identified, the whole industry had to just drop everything else and just focus on
True.
getting that remediated, right?
True.
So I think this is, I think, is a very important message, right? Uh, and I, use various forums to pass this message to all the stakeholders that I think if everybody understands and plays their part in cybersecurity, the world will be much safer. And we will be able to constantly adopt this digital transformation that we're doing for everybody else.
True. So, getting it maybe from an Infosys perspective, because you are looking at the business delivery perspective there. So, how do you think Infosys is boosting the efficiency and the efficacy of all technology assets for cyber resiliency in a hybrid and a meta world?
See, I think we believe that the to solve the cybersecurity problem, we have to do few things right. Okay.
Hmm.
I think the first thing is to ensure that we are able to identify the right stack or the right security architecture for the problem, right?
Okay.
Especially given the fact that there are so many solutions and so many tools and so many options available,
True.
the generally the buyer is always confused as to what is the right strategy and what is the right decision to make it. So that's the first problem. Okay. The second problem is that you need to be sentient and you need to be nimble in terms of executing cybersecurity. What I mean by sentient is that you should be able to identify patient zero quickly and ensure that everybody else is vaccinated against that particular threat, which is identified on the patient zero, right? So security is all about that, is all about responding, because you will never be able to stop patient zero because there are so many zero-day attacks and so many innovations happening that it's very difficult to keep pace with all the vulnerabilities and all the and fixing of all the patches, right? It's just impossible. I know I'm not saying it should not be done, but it's not possible to stop every attack, right? So therefore, you need to be sentient and you need to be nimble. You need to be swift in terms of response. And the third thing is that you need to make sure you have competent people with the right passion and motivation to operate the engine, right? So you need to have a proper flow of talent to be able to do that. So these are the three broad problems. And at Infosys, our strategy and approach has been that how do we build our strategy to tackle all these three broad problems, right? And so therefore, we are building our own platforms so that we can get the best of the breed, and then we can put it together in a well stitched kind of a well orchestrated manner so that it becomes a potent defense for any organization, right? The second thing that we are doing, and by nature of the work that we do, is that we are able to sort of see what's happening across the industry, across the geographies, and across the threat landscapes, right? So we are able to see everything, and so we are more sentient, and we get the advantage of the network effect, right? And and then the third thing is about you know how do we train and get the staff who are able to use the system and are proficient enough so that the time to value is very, very short, right? So that has been our approach, and I think that's worked quite well, and it becomes a win-win situation, right? um, there are other collateral advantages like you pay by use. You are able to have a better forecast in terms of your cost for managing security. It becomes more opex rather than capital investment, and you are able to scale. There is a lot of elasticity built into that model, right? And most importantly, we are able to control and govern our stack. you know Compared to some, for example, we are managing somebody else's stack, then we are dependent on somebody else to upgrade, to change, to invest. Whereas if we are investing, we are managing a stack, we can keep it current, we can keep it updated, we can change it based on the requirements of the situation, and so on and so forth. So that's been our approach, on this.
So, as you rightly mentioned, you have been looking at various industry verticals, when you're interacting with your customers. So we see this increasing fraud, scams being reported. The perimeter security is a perpetual problem, which you also mentioned. So do you think there has been specifications in terms of adaptation in certain verticals where you see a stringent security hygiene in place, or is there a long gap that needs to be covered?
I think there are nuances for every industry. So fundamentally, I would say that cybersecurity at a horizontal level has to be common framework for every industry. But then there are nuances such as, when you talk about healthcare, then you have to comply to HIPAA and HIPAA regulations. When it comes to banking, you have to an FS sector, we have to comply to banking and regulatory expectations. When you talk about government bodies, you have to look at their own certifications like high trust and other things, right? So one is the regulatory nature of compliance, which varies
Right,
from industry to
please.
industry. The second is about the type of work that we do, right?
Mhm.
So when pandemic was at the peak, there was obviously the risk to the vaccine formulation and other things, right? So there were multiple attacks on pharmaceutical companies, and they had to deal with those, right? When you talk about companies which have got intellectual property, then advanced persistent threats and nation state attacks are something that they need to really worry about, because the some of the documents and some of the confidential data that they have can be a target for these kind of threats which are there. So I think clearly, if you go from industry to industry, you would find those nuances, in terms of who would try to attack you. If you look at finance industry, we have seen that cybercrime has been on an all-time high, because obviously they're after the money, they're after your financial information and your funds. And so phishing, wishing, and all the exotic type of attacks are very prevalent in the banking and financial industry. So yeah, I think we've seen that, and accordingly, we there is this notion of being able to create a verticalized solution stack, or at least the use cases and playbooks for different industries.
Would you also like to maybe highlight something specifically on the vulnerabilities related to the current trending ransomware, malware? Do you want to comment on that also?
Yeah, I think what has happened with the advent of ransomware, and I think the first instance of that happened when we had a WannaCry or a NotPetya attack impacting the world. And since then, it has been on a constant rise, right?
Mm.
And there are many organizations which have been impacted. The reason is because of the indiscriminate nature of ransomware, right? Ransomware is one thing which does not discriminate across industries. And the other important characteristics of a ransomware is that it will impact any organization which comes in contact with it,
True.
right? So you don't really need to be a target to be a victim, you know. So so I think because of this, we are seeing a unprecedented rise of victims when it comes to a risk like a ransomware attack, right? Now, obviously, there this problem can be solved. It's not like a gloom and doom kind of a scenario, right? What you need is a clear strategy and a clear approach towards solving this issue. And I think the most important thing is actually realizing the fact that you have to do the boring stuff right? Not the exotic stuff, but the boring stuff, which is about getting your IT hygiene,
Absolutely.
clear, and starting with visibility of your assets, accountability, establishing accountability for each of the asset, um,
Mhm.
and shifting left and making the individuals who are custodians of the infrastructure take full ownership and responsibility of, uh, you know, managing the IT hygiene. And what I mean by IT hygiene is about patching and upgrading the software, right? You would be surprised the amount of obsolete stack that organizations are still carrying. The problem is that the operating system upgrade lifecycle has changed from something which used to be 4 to 5 years to now something like 18 months. So you'll
Mhm.
have to upgrade your operating system in a very short span of time as compared to what it was done earlier. Of course, in good old days, we used to do it through CDs. Now it is all automated, right? So
True.
it's not that difficult. It's just that you need to apply yourself. You need to have the infrastructure to do that, and then you need to have a proper mechanism to have visibility of all your vulnerabilities and then prioritization of remediation of those vulnerabilities, right? So I
True.
think you know this is a dynamically changing landscape, right? So what was yesterday a low risk vulnerability can today become a high risk vulnerability because a ransomware attack is exploiting that, right?
Mhm.
So you need to have a system which is able to identify the dynamic nature of the changing threat landscape. If you are able to build that infrastructure and that process and that orchestration, then
Mhm.
you can solve this problem.
Absolutely, so it's about detecting, giving a remediation and taking your action, of course. So, Vishal, of course, we have touched a lot of spaces in terms of cybersecurity because of paucity of time. Is there any closing thoughts or anything that you would like to tell the industry and maybe share some opinions on that front?
Yeah, I think the most important message is that I think security needs to be internalized. Gone are the days when you say in public that cybersecurity is important, but when it comes to your day-to-day work, you forget about it. You just cannot do that. You
Mhm.
need to walk the talk. If you say cybersecurity is important, you need to display and demonstrate that you take it very seriously and understand what role you need to play and actually execute it when nobody is watching. You don't need somebody else to come and tell you. You don't need a cybersecurity team to come and tell you, you're not patched this vulnerability, or you have so many overdue items, right? I think that is not scaling. So each stakeholder, whether it is business, whether it is leadership, whether it is board, whether it is your IT team, whether it's your IS team, or it's your user, all of them need to understand their responsibility and then execute that. If if we achieve that, then you will never face a cybersecurity attack. So that is the most important element. And that's what I would try to say here. And the other element that I would say is that cybersecurity is now a mainstream topic. It is not a side agenda that somebody sitting in some unit is going to drive. You need to embed that into every work that you do. If you're launching a very important business initiative, there has to be a cybersecurity consideration. If you're launching a new business product in banking, you need to have a cybersecurity consideration. So it has to be embedded into everything by design, so that it doesn't become an afterthought and you're not reacting when some fraud is hitting you. I think these are the two things that I would say as my passing message to your audience.
Absolutely. So as you rightly mentioned, it has to be embedded in the designing stage itself, not as an afterthought. And we are seeing that increasingly happening in the industry. But of course, innovation happens at the enterprise level and at the end of the threat actors also. So hoping we are more secured and more safe moving ahead. And the Computer Security Day has its importance, and continuing to see that spreading across and creating awareness. So thank you so much, Vishal, for your time. It was a pleasure having you and look forward to interacting with you in the future too. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you.